Laura Meyer, founder and CEO of Amazon solutions provider Envision Horizon.
And I'm Todd Pachowski, Director of Performance Marketing at Envision Horizons. We've teamed up to make the Common Mistakes podcast.
Todd and I meet with business owners, leaders, and investors to discuss common mistakes and other business experiences they've learned from. Tune in every other Tuesday for your dose of business advice. Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Common Mistakes. We are here to talk about mistakes we've made, we've seen, so you don't have to learn the hard way. I'm Laura Meyer.
And I'm Todd Pachowski. Today we have the privilege of Kim Salzer joining us. She is an outsourced fractional chief marketing officer who helps clients ignite their growth engines through instant strategy and execution. She loves to help consumer brands navigate the worlds of omni-channel or D2C in today's Phygital world. Kim, thank you for coming on. Welcome to the show. That intro was a bit short, I think, given your impressive resume. Is there anything else you would like to add about yourself or background before we get into the questions?
No, I want to make sure my last name is actually pronounced Salzer. It's actually German. I want to make sure that it was clear as insight, strategy, and execution. There are like three, we call them growth gear stages that we go through for small to middle market companies. And I work primarily in the consumer branded world.
Okay. Apologies on the mispronunciation and thanks for clarifying.
No problem. And I have to be transparent and say that I stole the word Phygital, which I absolutely love, from an Adweek article, but I think it so encapsulates some of the things we're going to be talking about today.
Well, Todd, I have to give you a little crap for saying it French instead of the German pronunciation, given that you are in Germany and married to a German woman.
Well, I saw it and I should have known, but yeah, I messed up today. So
it happens a lot.
Well, awesome. Well, Kim, it's a pleasure. We've collaborated before. It's great to see you again. I know that there's just so much wisdom you can bring to today's discussion. Given that you work as a fractional CMO, you obviously see a lot of organizations. And I think one of the big topics that has come up with our clients and other entrepreneurs I have conversations with is how to go about building out a marketing team now that there's so many specialties out there, right? From TikTok to email marketing to SMS, like the list is indefinite. So what are some mistakes you've seen or made yourself when it came to building out a marketing or e-commerce team?
Yeah, and I think it's important that we combine those two, marketing and e-commerce or direct-to-consumer marketing, even if you're not doing direct-to-consumer e-commerce, because in today's world, your customers are doing, pre-COVID, it was like 80% of the research on their own before they even approached you or aware enough about your brand to take action. Post-COVID, it's even more than that. And most of that research is done online in the digital sphere. So it's made, I think, brands that even hadn't woken up yet to the fact that they really need to think digital first are now thinking that way. But if they haven't been that way traditionally, some of the mistakes I've seen where they keep it siloed from the rest of the marketing department is the big thing I've seen in traditional brick and mortar brands. They'll bring in a quote digital team, but have it over here and sequestered from the rest of the marketing team. And therefore there's not enough communication between the two, not enough coordination, and knowing how they both can feed each other if it was combined into one. So that's probably the biggest. I think also the second big one would be underestimating the amount of investment into digital. And I'm not just talking dollar amount, I'm talking technology investment, and I'm talking the right people. I've often seen companies be very, very understaffed when it comes to digital. And because they hadn't grown up in the digital world themselves doing this type of detailed executional work, they don't understand the sheer manpower that it takes. And so I see a lot of people at the lower levels very overworked and overstrapped, and then they leave. So those I think are the two biggest mistakes I've personally seen.
You touched on it for a second there, but I want to ask a question about marketing tech. And before we do that, could you explain, and I think most of our listeners might know, but could you explain what Martech actually is? At the agency, we use a number of tools for marketing efforts, SEO tools, ad tools, CRMs. Is that list of tools essentially our Martech stack?
Yes. And I've even gone so far as to do visualization on it, data viz, to talk to my CEO at the time and show him, here's what we currently have, here's what we need, here's how it fits together. and here's the line item of the budget. Because you have to invest more in marketing technology than ever before. And the CEOs need to understand that and need to carve out a part of the budget to do that, or else they'll be dead in the water. In fact, I read an article recently where it talked about how companies who really invested in their Martech Stack, and I would also include logistics and supply chain technology in that as well, came out of the COVID supply chain woes far better off than companies who hadn't. And so there's never a wrong time to invest, but it's so critical. And a lot of companies that have been around for a while have old tech stacks that aren't working well in today's world. And there's so much new technology vendors coming on the scene every day. It seems pre-COVID, I think it was up, I think McKinsey had it up to over 9,000 vendors. So now, it's got to be more, and it's really hard to stay on top of that. It helps me in an outsourced fractional CMO because I actually belong to a company called Chief Outsiders. And now there's over 120 of us. We come from all walks of life, but we're constantly in the background sharing best practices and technology vendors because it helps us stay on top of it for our clients. But the tech stack can range from things like loyalty platforms, your email platform, your customer support software, your data, if you have a piece of consumer technology, data that comes from the piece of consumer technology hardware. And you want to bring it all together and have a single source of truth. And it's really critical that the technology backend, I can't overemphasize. And it's never too early to think about it too, if you're a startup.
What I read before this call today was the average marketing organization has deployed astounding 91 different tools as a part of their marketing stack. How do businesses rethink their sprawling Martech stacks and make them interconnected? Is it possible?
Well, you have to get a few different cross-functional folks together, because I've also seen where people add more technology platforms and not be using them, but yet they're still paying for them. And then they forget what they even do. And so it's just a waste of money out the door on that stuff. So you need to really sit down, put a close eye on it, and see everything. You have to list out everything you currently have and what it's being used for, what the cost is. And then you have someone hopefully then who can look outward and say, you know what, this is not really viable for your type of business. You should be using this instead. Or this new thing came along and it really works well with small companies in your type of business. And so, removing the waste that you're not using and don't need, and putting in new stuff that does serve your needs better going forward. But that's working closely with the CTO. And a side note, I've also read that the closest relationship in today's company now is between the CMO and the CTO for this reason, versus in the old days, it was a CFO. But the CFO needs to be involved too, because there's budgetary stuff involved here as well. But it's those three functions that really need to put a close eye on this.
Todd can probably attest. He gets slacks from me every month asking if we still use software as I audit our company credit card. So I want to go back to a point you also made in your first statement about teams being understaffed and overworked. And this is something we've also seen ourselves. And I think that during the pandemic, there was this major pendulum that swung of e-commerce teams being really understaffed because so many businesses were moving to the digital space very quickly. But now it kind of seems like we're on the other side, because we're seeing a lot of these layoffs, at least with very tech-heavy companies, because maybe they were potentially overstaffed. Mm-hmm. So, what are some good metrics to track as maybe a business owner or a business leader so that you can find that happy middle ground?
Like beyond your normal KPIs?
Yeah.
Well, I think you want to have a pulse on your internal culture and, be surveying your employees in terms of how happy they are at work, how hard they're working. You can't be a watchdog, especially now that people are remote, but you can have a pulse on, and not just talking as if you're a senior executive, you can't just talk one level down. You've got to talk multiple levels down to really understand the heart of what's going on with your employees and listen to them when they push back, because they're the ones in the front lines and they know what they're doing probably a lot better than you do if you're a senior exec. So just really listen to them and understand what they do on a day-to-day basis, and then use that to fill in blanks if you need to, or stretch people if they're ready to be stretched, or if you do have to make the hard layoffs for budgetary reasons, stretch people in the right way and things that they want to do, but don't just give them more and more stuff on their plate. because then
Yeah.
you're going to end up with no department. You know?
And
I've experienced that firsthand where I was it.
yeah. And what advice would you have, say, for an e-commerce manager who is super strapped to, like, what advice would you have for them to go to their senior management and advocate when maybe they have a stubborn senior manager or decision maker?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. There's no easy answers here. Always have suggestions. Just don't complain. Have suggestions, but do this before just abruptly quitting, because that's not good form either. And give people a chance to understand and make things better. But there's, I've seen other side too, and no easy answer for the ones that, just don't want to hear it, or, they're too crazy busy with other problems that, are higher priority at that moment in time. There is a big sense of maturity that these junior level folks need to take on in terms of managing their own lives and managing their reputations and their personal brands.
I'd like to move on to your favorite word, phygital.
Yeah.
You mentioned operating in a phygital world, which is a concept of, if I got it right, using tech to bridge the digital world with the physical, with the purpose of providing unique interactive experiences for users. And if I understand that right, some examples would be like a kiosk in McDonald's. You walk up there, you order something digitally, and then you go and get your burger. Or like a QR code in times of COVID, like you don't want to touch the menu. So you scan that and then you can see the menu. Would those be appropriate examples?
Yep. And they're obviously different depending on what industry you're talking about. You have the whole apparel industry where now you can digitally try on stuff, right? Or figure out your size or color, by taking a picture of yourself. You can have virtual skincare advisors, that analyze through an AI questionnaire, and of course your algorithms. And now we're moving into NFTs with a whole nother world. So yes, it's just converging more and more. And I think also we need to understand the younger generations don't separate their offline from their online selves. They really consider themselves one self, whether they're in some metaverse or they're offline doing something. That's different from the older generations like myself. Like you have an online presence and you have your offline being, but that's not the case anymore. So we need to treat customers like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up NFTs. So you're saying when someone's paying, $100,000 for a picture of an ape, and the older generation might scold at that and say it's ridiculous. For the younger generation, it's ultimately their world. It's all they know. So to them, it makes perfect sense to spend that money in the virtual world because it is their world.
Absolutely. And it's a side note for me. It's personally so interesting to watch the rise of NFTs and the metaverse, because I was deep in it. I ran product and marketing at Second Life, which one could argue was the first metaverse back in the day. And we had, full currency, your digital currency that was convert to real dollars for the first time, and objects that you would buy, and homes and real estate, and big brands set up shop in that world. If you're old enough to remember that, on the cover of Time magazine. And then it went away, but it was before its time. And now the macro environment and the psychology of the younger generations has caught up with that concept. And there's people that are doing it in a very good way, like Fortnite, who went in with their Trojan horse of a game and are building a metaverse on top of it. So, and people just they understand hanging out. You may not be doing anything with a goal or a game. While you're in there, you're hanging out with friends. So yeah, a lot of brands now jumping in to metaverse and to NFTs, and really appealing to this new generation.
Yeah, Tiffany's actually, and I sent Laura an article the other day, just launched exclusive minting of it, a necklace they made for punk holders, which is CryptoPunk as an NFT, which is just, yeah, luxury brands getting into the mix. I guess the question, if we go back to Phygital, where do you think brands today that are so advanced as your experience in the gaming and metaverse world, and kind of bridging these gaps, digital and physical, where can brands operate and see success in that?
It really depends on the vertical they play in, because that will determine what kind of needs they have. If it's a skincare company, maybe they want color matching, or look up what you currently use and match it in store. If it's apparel, you want to do some digital try-ons. And I think it's also a matter of making the actual store environment very phygital, making it more experiential. And we see that happening too with digital experiences in store, encourage them to hang out and of course purchase. But it does depend on the vertical in terms of what's needed, but there are a myriad of ways you can be involved in it.
This area though, right, requires experts.
Mhm.
And I think this goes back to an earlier point of if you're a brand who wants to either integrate more technology into your internal operations or how you're engaging with your customers, what's the best way to go about it? In your opinion, is it best route to bring on integration partners and have consultants or even full-time team members who specialize in that? Or do you want to learn it yourself and then start the process first and then maybe bring on a vendor to help you with it? What are some success stories that you've seen here?
Yeah, I tend to operate in a small to middle market space for my clients, and I usually recommend the former, which is find the expert vendors. Now, that does take research and time because there are so many of them out there, and that's the conundrum because CEOs don't have that time, and VPs of marketing don't often. I've never seen them have that time either. And so you can stay on top of it, read the trades, do webinars, but that's the rub here in terms, I think, of adoption for some of these new technologies. That's why it's one of the big things actually that we at Chief Outsiders do is we do help the CEOs and the tech stacks, because again, we're all in the background constantly keeping up on the stuff. It's a big session of ours at our national meeting, so that when we go into specific clients, I have a running trusted vendor list for this reason that's all categorized, so I can remember like who does this and who does that and plug and play into my client, because I want them to not be burdened as much as possible. And I want them to trust that I'm going to bring them an expert who is very specifically will fill your needs.
Yeah. The benefit, right, of a lot of this technology is to streamline communication, collaboration, and data insights. And earlier you talked a little bit about there being these internal silos between the physical team and the digital team. What are some best practices you've really seen to bring those together? Is it maybe shared KPIs and shared responsibilities so they have to collaborate? Is it meetings that have good purpose to it? Because we all love unnecessary meetings, right? So curious to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, first is having the right butts in the right seats, right? That goes back to the org planning. And the technology that you mentioned is one of the biggest reasons for tech beyond getting beyond the customer experience. It's the internal that's going to enable single source of truth, collaboration, efficiency. So I can't again overemphasize the tech backbone enough when it comes to this. And then I think, and that includes logistics. Again, let's not forget, especially if you're a DTC and Amazon. And then it's the processes. And I try not to overprocess stuff. To your point, I hate meetings like that, but enough of a process in place that the teams come together, really well-run meetings with agendas, follow-up items, who's on point, all the sorts of guide to run good meetings, and to do follow-up. I wouldn't necessarily share responsibilities. I would share KPIs in many cases, but the roles and responsibilities should be written on paper, be very clear who's doing what. And even if you want to visualize it in terms of if it ends up being matrix, who's working with who on this, etc. But there's got to be one point person at the end of the day, in my mind. And then I think, yeah, they can't emphasize enough just the communication aspect of this.
And the follow through, right? Like it's so easy to start some of these projects and then you hit your busy season or something else occurs and you lose sight of the original goal.
Absolutely. I see that happen a lot with clients, and it saddens me, for example, after my engagement has ended and I check back in 6 months later and they still haven't implemented something that I hugely recommended as like my number one recommendation. Like, would help you so much. Yeah, I think don't get implemented. People lose sight. People are too busy, and it just gets dropped because there's so many other fires. And I also see with earlier stage companies a lot of shiny new penny syndrome. Always wanting to check out new things versus implementing something that had already been well thought out. I see quite a bit of that as well.
And I feel like that's especially prevalent when it comes to social media and digital marketing in general. Oh, I hear Reddit ads are really efficient. Oh, have you tried Pinterest? And it's like, if you're a two-person digital team, you can't do all of those channels well on your own.
No way.
It's not possible.
That's where we loop back to the overtaxed folks, because it sounds great, but it takes a lot of work. Even just doing your email, your monthly email campaign needs a lot of coordination between the site person, the email person, the copywriter, the creative team. It's not just something you pull a trigger on in 24 hours.
Yeah, 100%. And Laura, I feel like you were calling me out when you talk about a small digital team and going into different areas. You can never become the expert with so many things that keep coming to surface these days. Like the amount of tools and expertise needed to be good at that takes too many hours that you can't do the rest of your duties. So
absolutely. And you'll also find at the CMO level in particular, you no longer can find, quote, a full stack CMO, because the landscape has broadened so much. You may have a creative driven CMO, you may have a technology driven CMO, an operational driven CMO, etc. But the full stack CMO is a thing of the past too. So the CMO just needs to be savvy enough to know where to fill in any gaps or needs from her background experience so that she'll have it on her team, and that she has the specialized experience in these areas that she or he may not have direct experience in, to also fill it out and make sure she's learning from them. These days, the execs have to learn from the younger folks.
Of course, yeah. I know nothing about TikTok, but there's people on our team that know a ton. So that's certainly the case over here. We're coming up on time, and just to be respectful of your time, I want to ask just a question, and Laura, maybe you have another closing question, but your background, looking at your resume anyways, varies tremendously from working in traditional industries like Clorox to EA games and sports, which I think is the connection to the metaverse and kind of understanding the gaming area. Despite all these industry differences, and this might be a big question, but are there any common marketing mistakes that you've seen through the lifespan of your work that you would call out?
And I'm glad you pointed that out, Todd. I do like to mix it up, and I do tend to play in those two lanes deeply. So I tend to have some sort of gaming related client or consumer technology related client. And right now I'm an ed tech client, but I also have the DTC e-commerce consumer goods side of it that I enjoy as well. Similar issues between those very disparate industries. I'd say I see similar issues more so having to do with size or the stage that the company is in. For example, I talked about shiny new penny, or not effective prioritization in managing that constantly for the earlier stage companies. Then I see the companies that are on the precipice of needing to scale, which usually happens around 30 employees in my experience. And they may hit a roadblock because the processes and roles and responsibilities and all that kind of stuff is not in place, and or the founders are pulling back out of the business and putting and delegating. So I've seen that at that stage. And then I've seen it, the next pivot point would be around 75 employees. Now you really have to start to become a company, and especially then when you hit 120, now you need like good healthcare and a good HR group and things like that in place, and really solid operational management at the top. So I break it out more by stage versus the different industries. Now, of course, consumer gaming is very different. We have all the development issues come into play. You guys are probably well aware of those. You get down a certain path in your software dev, and all of a sudden you have to, oh crap, we need to change a bunch of stuff. Or then I've seen a lot of cases where they had to scrap it all and start all over at an early stage, couple of early stage companies. So that tends to happen more on the technology and gaming side for sure. But not to say those things in a similar vein, a large traditional brick and mortar apparel brand had a horrible back end because they kept them so band-aided over the years with old tech that there's no single source of truth that I alluded to before. And we kind of had to like really do major rework on it. That just actually happened to another consumer DTC brand I had. We had to redo most all of the back end. It happens at all stages too.
Well, I love that you get your hands dirty in all these projects, and you have such insight into all types of companies and stages. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today, Kim. It's always a pleasure. If our listeners look to get in touch with you, what are some of the best ways for them to do that?
Sure. You can always visit the chiefoutsiders.com website. You can actually check out all of us. My bio is listed there. And I believe my email is as well. But if not, you can always inquire on the website. If anyone requests my email, I'm happy to share.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And thank you, listeners, for joining yet another episode of Common Mistakes.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Todd. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Common Mistakes. If you're not yet subscribed, be sure to follow us and visit envisionhorizons.com to sign up for our weekly newsletter with all the latest Amazon news and expert advice. For Amazon sellers looking for more support, check out our Amazon brand management platform, My Horizons, and sign up for a free trial. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you on the next episode of Common Mistakes.